Never fear, Sindash is here, and I'm bringing to you a new series. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take and look at aspects of storytelling and apply them to Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, GT, Super, so on. Today we're going to talk about the idea of audience. So when you tell a story, it's important to take your audience into consideration. And a good storyteller is going to make tweaks to the story that will fit their audience best. And so that may mean changing the name of something. It may mean changing some detail or some line so that it makes more sense to your audience than some other line might make. And so we have the English dub. And the English dub changes names occasionally. It changes lines. Sometimes for the better, sometimes maybe for the worse. But most of the time, the reason for this is because Toei focused on their Japanese audience. Then we get our English anime dub from Funimation, and they're changing things to fit a North American English population. They have a different audience. And so it's appropriate for there to be differences in the story. In fact, good storytelling will purposely incorporate differences. So you look at Dragon Ball Super versus the Battle of Gods movie, the Fukatsu no F movie, and you ought to have some small detail differences. Like in Super, Bulma's party is on a yacht as opposed to someplace else. That's a small detail. You can work with it. It doesn't change the story very much. It's a very minor detail. Now we get to Fukatsu no F, and especially, and Super has made some pretty drastic changes there. Some of them for good, some of them maybe not so good. But they're right to try and make changes. And Hale Zeon, in his most recent review for episode 23, makes the point very well that even though a lot of these changes in Super seem drastic, the end result is still coming out the same. I mean, it's still going to be no one can compete against Frieza except Vegeta and Goku. And so Goku's going to fight Frieza first, and then he's going to go, and Vegeta's going to get upset the fight's taking too long, and this and that and the other, and most of what's going to happen next is going to look a lot like what happened in the movie. The fight choreography is going to be somewhat different, which is an appropriate version of changing the story. And while I would say they've maybe gone too far in some of their changes, while it was good to have Goten and Trunks show up, and those changes were good, but they were poorly executed changes. Let's put it that way. Most of the changes they made were nice changes, but they poorly executed most of them. And so we've got a lot of plot holes, things that don't really match up with the original story, not just the original movie story, but with all the other things we know of the original characters from Dragon Ball Z. I mean, we know the Metamarines fusion should last half an hour, and that Goten and Trunks, in that fused state as Gotenks, can fly around the Earth multiple times in under 30 minutes. And so it makes no sense for them to defuse after one strike and a couple of words. You know, Piccolo's death in episode 22, beginning of 23, may or may not make sense depending on which version of Piccolo's regenerative abilities you want to go by. The most recent version in the Buu Saga makes his regenerative abilities much more advanced than earlier parts of the story. If you go by that version, a shot in the chest shouldn't kill him. Just like the shot in the chest by Nappa shouldn't have really killed him. Now you can maybe make a claim like we do for the fight with Nappa that more of his body was damaged. But again, going by the Buu standards, if his head's okay, he should be okay. It's not just limbs he can regenerate. He should be able to regenerate core parts of his body. But that's not what happens. And so they don't execute their changes well. And that's bad storytelling. But the fact that they're making changes, the fact that they're trying to make changes to reach a specific audience, and although, the movie changes to anime changes, some of that is pandering to the audience because the audience told them, we wish you to put Goten and Trunks in the series. We wish this and that. And so they've given us a little bit of some of what we've asked for. And that's kind of where I think a lot of these changes in the series have come from. It's because they are trying to reach their audience. The audience said, we wish you'd done these things. And so now that they're retelling the story in a series fashion where they have episodes and they can put more time into it, they tried to make some of those changes, but they didn't fully work out how it needed to play out. They didn't fully develop the changes, and so they executed most of them very poorly. Going back now to changes, especially in the dubs, I hear people fighting over terminology, wordings, whether you want to use the Japanese of a name or the English of a name. The English names are just as valid as the Japanese names because, yes, that's the original material, but it was written for the Japanese audience, the Japanese language, and when the dub comes and puts it into English language, they had the right to give things English names, or something along those lines. So instead of Piccolo, is very confusing to say Makaka-sen. I can't even say it right. I know Sapo. I pretty much know how the word, but it's impossible to say. And so in English, we gave it an English name, Special Beam Cannon, or the Kinto-un, the Nimbus Cloud. In English, we understand what a Nimbus Cloud is, so there's nothing wrong with calling it a Nimbus Cloud. Now, admittedly, there are English changes that shouldn't have happened. There should never have been such a thing as a, what was it, Vegerot? Was that the one name change for Vegito? He became Vegerot, which, horrible. That should never have happened. But there's nothing wrong with making changes from the Japanese words to English words. That suits your English audience. Now, when you start using phrases that give a different interpretation of what's really going on, like Ultimate Gohan versus Mystic Gohan, the best version is Ultimate Gohan. And when people start using Mystic Gohan, they start thinking of things differently, what the Mystic transformation means versus the Ultimate having all of his power drawn out and focused into base form. That's what Ultimate meant. Mystic, that tends to mean something very different to people. And so you do have to be careful with wording, with phrasing things. And, there's a lot of complaints about dubbed lines that they should have been left alone. They should have been more accurate to the Japanese. And sometimes we need to pay attention to those because these guys who are telling you those things, it is important sometimes for the storyline that the English dub messes things up a little bit in terms of what we should understand about the characters or about the storyline. But some of them, they keep the core. They really do still keep the heart of what's being supposed to be going on, and so they don't hurt anything to make changes. And sometimes even those changes that maybe are a bit more different than some of these other guys would like, they are still actually better for the American audience and fit the American audience better than the Japanese in some way or shape or form, whether it's for comedy purposes or whatever. It suits the American audience, and so it's okay. And while I do think you need to listen, and for the more advanced Dragon Ball Z fan, you need to pay attention to the manga, the Japanese with subtitles where you know what's really going on. It's a good thing to pay attention to what the original content was. But for your average fan, the dub is perfect. Not perfect, but the dub is a good fit. And it's okay to enjoy the English dub. It was designed for us as Americans or Canadians or whatever to fit us as an audience. So that's my first video in my new series. I do hope to do a few more of these. I don't know how many I will do, but we'll look at some other aspects of storytelling and correlate those to the story of Dragon Ball. Hope you found this intriguing and interesting. I hope you'll like the video. I hope you'll continue to check out my channel, and if you have not done so, that you'll subscribe. This is Super Saiyan 7 Cinders, and I will be back with more content in the near future. Just a disclaimer that anytime I use a picture, or if I do use video footage from any of the anime, I do not own the content. The content is, of course, the creation of Akira Toriyama, and the rights either go to Toei Animation, Funimation Entertainment, or Viz Media. So please support them, as it is their content.